Will vinyl mastered analog sound identical in digital? This question comes from John in Rochester, New York. Music enthusiasts insist that one medium sounds better than the other. Boy, you think there's a bit of a divide there? Yet, I have example videos of vinyl in my collection that sound great and ones that sound bad. And the same is true for my CD collection. Examples that sound great and ones that sound bad. So, if I understand this correctly, the mechanical limitations of vinyl require special mastering. So it's inherently different than a digital master, which is true. Which means that master recordings for the same piece of music for vinyl and digital will sound different compared to each other. So my real question is, if music is mastered for vinyl, is digitized and played back digitally, will it have the same warm sound of a vinyl record? Or, to put it another way, are listeners responding to the mastering or the media? Now, on my daily posts, Paul's posts, we've talked a lot about this. So let's dig deep, a little deep in these short videos, can't get too deep. Analog is limited. Now, by analog, I don't mean the electronic form analog, because analog certainly isn't limited. It's the capture method of analog is limited. So, everything we hear is, and then record is an analog of everything we hear. And the best analog methods that we currently have are still vinyl and tape. So there may someday be other analog means of recording, but right now let's just focus on vinyl. Vinyl has limited dynamic range, 60, maybe 70 on a good day. So that's quite a lot. 60 or 70 dB is and that's the difference between the loudest and the softest, okay? Now a CD has 30 dB more. A CD, we're not talking about high resolution here, CDs have around 100 dB of dynamic range. So if we go from 60 to 100 or 70 to 100, there's a lot of difference there. Now, many recordings, especially when digital first came out, took zero advantage of the extra dynamic range, because if you compare the top levels, let's say the loudest that the turntable gets and the loudest that the CD gets, let's call them equal. Okay, we're going to put out 2 volts, 1.5 volts, whatever, at the output of the preamp. And so the loudest that we get for both digital and analog will be the same. Now we're going to go down and we're going to say, what's the softest we can get? Well, analog is going to cut off about here, and we're going to start getting into the noise levels of the turntable spinning around and the needle going in it. So that's about here. We can keep going down quieter and quieter and quieter in digital. All right, so there's the difference. Now, a lot of original, like tape, things that were recorded on tape, well, they can't go much lower than this, and this being the analog, right? Tape can't go down here because there's just noise. And so when we had original recordings, and at first that's all we had was tape recordings that we transferred over to digital, well, there was no advantage because there was nothing lower than this. Does that make sense? So you could only get out of tape 60, 70 dB again. And so we didn't take advantage of digital's extra dynamic range. As time went on and we started using digital recorders, now we could, though mastering engineers for the most part weren't used to recording things very quietly and taking advantage of that. So many of the digital recordings back then, and still today, keep within that 70 dB range and don't bother going down. Some of the better recordings we have that people have taken care are taking advantage, like reference recordings. You know, they routinely take advantage of very, very soft passages that you could never get on vinyl. All right, so there's your sort of background. Now, what he's talking about, who is it? John. What John's talking about is the fact that if I have a digital recording that really encompasses all 90 dB or 100 dB that's available to us, I can't fit all that onto a 70 dB vinyl space, right? I'm going to have to do something that has this horrible sound to it, the word, not the method, compress it, right? And by compressing it, there's two ways you can compress it. You can limit how loud it goes, which is usually what you hear on the radio, where they turn up the low and they squish down the high, and that sounds like crap. Sirius radio, if you ever listen to Sirius XM radio, that is compressed to a point that somebody ought to be taken to jail for it. How you guys get away with, don't get me going about Sirius FM, Sirius XM. They play great music, they have great jocks, and horrible sound, the worst on the planet. Who's in charge of that? I don't know, but they ought to be taken out and horsewhipped somewhere. Just squeeze it in. But compression can take a form that is very gentle and actually can sound pretty good. And how do we do that? We leave all the loud passages alone. Don't touch them. We take a compressor and we turn up the softest sounds, right? And because they're way down here, we amplify them up so they fit within this space. So you're taking this and fitting it up here without affecting that. And so a good mastering engineer can do that, squeeze it into the space of 60, 70 dB and put it onto a record. And that's how that's simplifying the differences of mastering for vinyl and digital. That's what they do. And that's why a big reason why a lot of people prefer vinyl, because you hear more of the stuff. Some of that stuff down there are harmonics, are things that are not so evident, like a pluck of a string has very low amplitude harmonics that go out into here. And if you raise those up, it changes the tonality to something richer than what we would normally have heard. We blame the medium, but it doesn't deserve it. It's the way it's mastered. So, long-winded, sorry about that. Let me get to his basic question. If we take a vinyl analog master and we digitize it, it will sound, if you have a good DAC, like this kind of stuff, right? If you have this stuff, it'll sound identical, absolutely identical. My friend, reviewer Michael Fremmer, routinely digitizes his vinyl and listens to it on headphones because it sounds good. He'll tell you it doesn't sound identical. I'm going to tell you it's close enough that we call it good, all right? Of course, identical is such a tough word because that gets the hair on people's neck and head up, because identical is so explicit. Let's just say it sounds the same. How's that? All right. Hope that helped. Talk to you later. Bye.